In this episode, we will be covering how strong is the 1998 TriStar Godzilla, being Hollywood and by extension America's first go at a live-action Godzilla. The film has had a long, rocky process from the beginning of 1992, and took another 6 years before it finally got off the ground. The creators of the film weren't exactly Godzilla's hugest fans, and were more interested in riding the coattails of the dinosaur movie at the time, Jurassic Park, and it shows with the similarities between the two films. Standing at just under 55 meters and weighing 500 tons, this creature would be known by many names, such as American Godzilla, Hollywood Godzilla, Tora Goji, Amerigoji, Godzilla 1998, Fred, Gino, which is an acronym for Godzilla in name only, Dean Zilla, Fraud Zilla, Zilla in its later incarnations, and of course, Chin Zilla. With that, we've got the introductions out of the way, so let's start with the movie. The French conduct a 1968 nuclear test in Mururoa Atoll in the French Polynesia. Oh goody, the same location that the Dark Horse Comics Godzilla visited in issue 14 of his run. Anyway, the bomb is detonated. I'm fairly certain this is actually reused footage of the Castle Bravo bomb, and we see an iguana egg get irradiated from the blast. Kind of ironic that the first American Godzilla movie monster isn't even American in origin. Anyway, we fast forward 30 years later to the year 1998, the same year the movie came out, and Godzilla off-screen tears through a Japanese fishing vessel. We get introduced to all our main human characters just in time for Godzilla to make a more formal appearance as he just struts through Manhattan. Given that the vast majority of buildings vastly dwarf Godzilla in size, and the fact that he's surrounded by water, being an aquatic creature, allows Godzilla to easily slip in and out at a moment's notice. Our main human protagonist comes up with a plan to lure out the monster.
Say the line, Bart!
That's a lot of fish.
Eventually luring out the creature, where the human military proceeds to open fire on Godzilla, with pretty much only their rifle gunfire managing to actually hit him, with Godzilla managing to easily dodge a lot of their rocket fire. He is then pursued by Apache helicopters, where despite being locked on, they manage to miss and accidentally blow up the Chrysler building. It's then revealed that Godzilla's body temperature is colder than the buildings around him.
Echo 1, we had you locked on.
The heat seekers can't lock, sir. He's colder than the buildings around him.
He then manages to pull some ninja crap, where it's like right when they're right behind him, he somehow manages to slip away and crash through into them from the building behind them. And when another helicopter's trying to escape from Godzilla, he's like, oh, I'm in the clear. And then suddenly Godzilla appears below him right in front of him. Like, how did he even get around that fast? Godzilla was causing the ground to shake with his footsteps when he first appeared in the Big Apple. But now suddenly he can just quickly sneak around buildings without making a sound? I don't get it. After the conflict, the human character uncovers a blood sample of Godzilla, proving that he can indeed be killed, and that he's also pregnant.
Last time you didn't even scratch it.
That's not true. Our worm guy, Dr. Tatopoulos here has found blood.
Military's second attempt on the monster goes for the most part the same way as the first, except this time they managed to lure him into the bay with 3 submarines waiting for him. Godzilla manages to get the first submarine to blow itself up, but as he's attempting to burrow through the bay, the other 2 submarines launch their torpedoes and manage to hit him, seemingly killing him. The main human characters look for the nest and find it, unearthing hundreds if not thousands of baby Godzillas.
Oh my god, fish. They've eaten all the fish.
And manage to get word out to the public of their existence, which convinces the military to send fighter jets to blow up Madison Square Garden, which they do. However, the fight isn't over yet, as Godzilla unearths himself from the ruins of Madison Square Garden, still alive, and spends the next couple of minutes chasing down a taxi, even though he seemed to have no difficulty chasing down Apache helicopters, before getting trapped at the Brooklyn Bridge, where the fighter jets proceed to pelt him full of missiles until he collapses and finally dies. Needless to say, the watchers of this film were not particularly pleased with the outcome. Godzilla basically just looks like a glorified T-Rex, and he gets killed by the military. Something that should never happen in a Godzilla film, at least if it's through conventional weapons. He doesn't even have his signature atomic breath, something that apparently according to early designs he was supposed to have. Now, the closest he gets is some sort of flammable power breath that's strong enough to blow cars away, which apparently someone working on the film had to fight to get permission to put in. Had the film been more well received, it would have gotten 2 follow-up movies. One which would have featured a very interesting choice for a name of monster, and the other we have no idea about because obviously they didn't get that far in the planning phase. This iteration of the monster put so much shame on the name that Toho themselves purchased the rights to this likeness of Godzilla so they could rebrand it to Zilla, embodying the quote from this one reviewer of the movie saying that it took the god out of Godzilla. There were 4 major positive things that come out as a result of this movie, however. The first being a lesson on how not to make a Godzilla movie, and that maybe you should have your director and writer actually respect the character you're making a movie for. Second, the Millennium era of Godzilla movies happened directly as a result of this movie's failure, forcing Toho out of early retirement to make more Godzilla movies just to get that bad taste out of everyone's mouth. The third being the merchandise. Seriously, look at all this. A Godzilla cup, Godzilla flashlight, Godzilla lip balm, some kind of inflatable hand thing, Godzilla pens, some sort of walkie-talkie thing, some sort of cake placement thing. Hey, I actually had this one. And some kind of board game. Say what you will about the movie and monster themselves, but I would be a proud owner of a Godzilla flashlight and some sort of rampaging board game thing. I do, however, feel like the marketing and advertisement for this movie was a little misleading on Godzilla's size. Seriously, could you imagine if he was actually this big based off the poster? It's even worse for the Japanese poster where his foot alone is the size of the Statue of Liberty. I don't think people would have even cared what he looked like if Godzilla was just that enormous. It'd be an entirely different movie. Didn't matter what you threw at him, he'd just be too large to take down. With that little positive tangent out of the way, let's finally get to the feats section of the video. Starting off, Godzilla manages to wreck through a cannery ship, which should be at least building level. Pretty self-explanatory. Godzilla should be at the bare minimum building level on sheer size alone. After his first stroll through Manhattan, he bulldozes his way through the MetLife building, leaving a giant hole in the center, based off the size of the hole and the contents in which the MetLife building is made out of. This has been calculated to be 83 tons of TNT, putting Godzilla in the high city block level. He gets wounded by infantry fire as evidence of the blood left at the scene after the fight. Seeing as how small arms fire is the only thing fast enough to hit him, as he just dodges all the rockets and missiles they throw at him, he manages to keep up with and outmaneuver Apache helicopters. In the second attack against Godzilla, he gets cornered by 2 Ohio-class submarines who launch their Mark 48 torpedoes at him, each carrying about 0.29 tons of TNT, which when doubled is about 0.58 tons of TNT, which is solid building level. This is enough to knock Godzilla out. According to the novelization, this was actually when Godzilla had his armor blasted off. Yeah, apparently this Godzilla had some sort of armor around him. Didn't do much good when he got blasted by small arms fire earlier in the movie, now didn't. Even if he was just plain dead, the fact that Godzilla would even have to resort to that trick, given how easily he was able to take out the first submarine, still doesn't look good on his part. And if infantry fire is still enough to draw a little blood from him, then building level attacks is going to leave way more of a mark than that. The F-18 Hornets that blow up Madison Square Garden near the end of the movie actually use Harpoon missiles, which you can actually see one of them select right before they launch their missiles. Each of these missiles has an explosive yield of 1.355 gigajoules, which is about 0.32 tons of TNT. Since 2 of them blow up the MetLife building, that's about 0.64 tons of TNT, which is building level, so far consistent compared to the damage Godzilla took from those torpedoes earlier. Seeing as how 12 of these missiles would impact Godzilla at the end of the movie, that would total to about 3.84 tons of TNT, which is large building level. Combine the 2 torpedoes that he took earlier in the movie, then that would be 4.42 tons of TNT, which is still large building level, if we assume the whole armor statement from the book is canon to the movie counterpart. Also, apparently, while Godzilla was tangled on the Brooklyn Bridge, he still managed to dodge some of the missiles. I don't know how he'd be able to do that given that he's trapped. If he has that kind of freedom of movement, he should have been able to break free. Jumping back to the missiles blowing up Madison Square Garden, I've actually seen some alternate takes on this feat, and apparently those missiles should not have been strong enough to destroy the building as big as it did, suggesting that the missiles in this movie are actually more powerful than their real-life counterpart. Apparently, blowing up Madison Square Garden to the extent that it was done in the movie equivalent to about 16 tons of TNT, which is city block level. That's with 2 missiles. So if we take into account the total of 12 missiles fired at Godzilla at the end of the movie, that would actually total to about 96 tons of TNT, which is just knocking on the door to reaching multi-city block level. There's also been an alternative analysis on the destruction of the MetLife building that somehow got calculated to 7.2 kilotons of TNT, which is town level. I don't see how, even if you completely destroyed this building, that would be the equivalent of town level, especially since obviously Godzilla didn't even destroy the entire building either. I'm going off the Versus Wiki's version of this analysis because they actually show their work for how they got to the 83 tons of TNT result. Briefly dipping back into the speed section, Godzilla was able to once again outpace Apache helicopters, which have subsonic speed, which means he should also have subsonic combat and reaction speed, and can apparently move at 300 miles per hour, and has dodged rockets numerous times after they've been fired at him throughout the whole movie. He also has his moments of intelligence where he manages to outmaneuver the military multiple times and somehow sneak up behind them, even though one can argue he shouldn't even be able to see them given the tall buildings in his way. This scene where the choppers are firing through the massive hole in the building makes me wonder if Godzilla was actually there or if he was just pretending, making sounds to make them think they were hitting him, when he was actually just waiting right behind them, waiting to pounce. He easily burrows underneath Manhattan multiple times throughout the entire movie, and given his adapted aquatic nature, Manhattan really is the perfect stomping grounds for him. And had his babies not been killed, there would have been as many as 40,000 of them by the year's end. Not to mention, he sees the corpse of his babies and sees the humans nearby, and is smart enough to make the connection that they had something to do with that. Not to mention his clever little maneuver to get the one submarine to blow itself up with its own torpedoes. Godzilla could have easily just smashed his way through the torpedo or tore it apart, but it's like, no, you knew if he just flew under or over that submarine, the torpedo was going to hit that instead of him. Finally, to recap his durability, street to possibly wall level attacks are enough to at least make him bleed a little bit. Building level attacks are enough to incapacitate him, or at least endanger him to the point where he'd rather play dead than risk taking further damage, and large building to high city block level attacks are enough to put him down for good. So how strong is the TriStar movie Godzilla? Well, depending on how you look at it, his attack power might actually outweigh his durability by quite a bit. But if it is to be believed that the Harpoon missiles used to destroy Madison Square Garden in the movie are actually way stronger than their real-life counterpart, then yeah, it would sync up with the amount of destruction Godzilla inflicted on the MetLife building, both of which are in the high city block level range. He's just knocking on the door to reaching multi-city block level. Just a few more tons of TNT would do it. But alas, we now have a new weakest Godzilla on our Godzilla rankings list. It might not remain that way forever, however. You'll just have to wait and see. It really does seem like only the strongest non-nuclear military military weapons is what it would take to put this Godzilla down. It's also not really made clear if he has any kind of regeneration ability either. The novel did describe Godzilla as looking a little worse for wear when he emerged from the ruins of Madison Square Garden right before his death. However, this isn't the real end of this Godzilla either. There would indeed be light at the end of this short metaphorical tunnel in the form of the animated series that would come after the live-action film. Join me next time as we cover the critically acclaimed animated series that would follow the 1998 film. Take care, folks.